The snow fell in thick, relentless sheets across the New Mexico territory, an unusual Christmas storm that had turned the normally dusty streets of Chisholm Ranch into a treacherous white expanse. And Theresa Dalton stood shivering outside the saloon with nothing but the thin dress on her back, and the realization that the man she had trusted had left her with absolutely nothing at all. Her fingers had gone numb an hour ago, and her teeth chattered so violently she thought they might crack. The bruise on her cheekbone throbbed where Marcus had struck her before he rode off with everything they owned, including the horse, the wagon, and the small bag of coins she had saved from selling her mother's jewelry. He had left her in this frontier town on Christmas Eve, with cruel laughter still echoing in her ears and the promise that no one would help a woman like her. Theresa was 22 years old, and she had never felt so alone in her entire life. The saloon owner had already turned her away when she begged for work or shelter. The general store was closed for the holiday. The church stood dark and silent at the end of the street, and she had already tried the door only to find it locked. Every building she passed seemed to reject her, their windows glowing with warm lamplight that only emphasized how cold and lost she was. Her vision blurred with tears that froze on her lashes, and she stumbled forward through the snow, not knowing where she was going, only knowing that she could not stop moving or she would surely freeze to death. That was when she collided with something solid and warm, and strong hands caught her before she fell face first into a snowdrift. Theresa looked up through her tears and saw a man with dark eyes and a weathered face studying her with concern. He wore a heavy coat and a wide-brimmed hat that was dusted with snow, and he steadied her with a gentleness that seemed incongruous with his rough appearance. "Miss, you are going to die out here," he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the howling wind. "Where is your coat? Where are your people?" Theresa tried to answer, but her jaw was shaking too hard to form words. She could only stare at him with desperate, pleading eyes as the strength drained from her legs. The world tilted sideways, and she felt herself falling again, but the man caught her easily and lifted her into his arms as though she weighed nothing at all. "I have got you," he said firmly. "Stay with me now." She was dimly aware of movement, of being carried through the storm, of a door opening and blessed warmth washing over her frozen skin. The man set her down near a wood stove that radiated heat, and she curled toward it instinctively, her whole body trembling. She heard him moving around the small cabin, heard the clink of metal and the splash of water being poured. Then he was kneeling beside her, wrapping a heavy quilt around her shoulders and pressing a tin cup of something hot into her shaking hands. "Drink this," he ordered, slowly. The liquid was coffee, strong and bitter and scalding hot, and it burned all the way down her throat. Theresa coughed and gasped, but the warmth spread through her chest and began to thaw the terrible cold that had settled into her bones. She took another sip, then another, and gradually the violent shaking began to subside. The man stayed beside her, adding wood to the stove and adjusting the quilt around her shoulders without saying a word. When she could finally speak, her voice came out as a hoarse whisper. "Thank you." "Who left you out there?" he asked, his tone hard. "A man I should not have trusted," Theresa said bitterly. She looked down at the coffee cup, unable to meet his eyes. "I thought he was going to marry me. Instead, he took everything I had and abandoned me here. I have no money, no belongings, nowhere to go." The man was silent for a long moment. When she finally gathered the courage to look at him, she found him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. He appeared to be in his late 20s, with tanned skin and strong features that suggested long hours working under the sun. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at the edges beneath his hat, and there was a scar along his jawline that spoke of a hard life. "What is your name?" he asked. "Theresa Dalton," she said quietly. "I am from Missouri originally. I came west with Marcus because he said we would start a new life together, but it was all lies." "My name is Harrison Cole," the man said. "I work cattle on the Chisholm Ranch. This cabin is mine." He paused, his expression thoughtful. "You can stay here tonight. Tomorrow we will figure out what to do." Theresa felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time they were tears of relief. "I cannot pay you, I have nothing." "I did not ask for payment," Harrison said. He stood and moved to the small kitchen area, where he began pulling out supplies. "When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning," Theresa admitted. Her stomach cramped painfully at the thought of food. Harrison made a sound of disapproval and began preparing a meal with efficient movements. Theresa watched him, still wrapped in the quilt, as warmth gradually returned to her extremities accompanied by painful tingling. The cabin was small but well-maintained, with a bed in one corner, a table and 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies, and the large wood stove that was currently saving her life. It was a simple dwelling, but it was clean and dry and blessedly warm. Harrison set a plate in front of her with beans, salt pork, and cornbread, along with more coffee. Theresa ate slowly at first, then more quickly as her hunger overcame her manners. He sat across from her with his own plate, eating in silence and occasionally glancing at her with those dark, unreadable eyes. "This storm will last through tomorrow at least," Harrison said when they had both finished eating. "Maybe longer. You cannot leave until it passes." "Where would I go anyway?" Theresa asked with a hollow laugh. "I know no one here. I have no family waiting for me anywhere." Harrison studied her for another long moment. "How old are you?" 22, she said. "Old enough to have known better than to trust a man like Marcus." 22 is not so old, Harrison said, and trust is not a weakness, even when it is misplaced. He stood and began clearing the dishes. "You should rest. Take the bed. I will sleep by the stove." "I cannot take your bed," Theresa protested. "You can and you will," Harrison said in a tone that brooked no argument. "You nearly froze to death an hour ago. You need proper rest." Theresa was too exhausted to argue further. She made her way to the bed on unsteady legs and collapsed onto it, still wrapped in the quilt. The mattress was thin but comfortable, and the pillow smelled faintly of soap and something masculine that was not unpleasant. She closed her eyes, intending to rest for just a moment, but sleep claimed her immediately. When she woke, pale winter light was filtering through the cabin's single window, and the storm was still raging outside. Harrison was already awake, tending the stove and preparing breakfast. He glanced over when he heard her stirring. "Good morning," he said. "How do you feel?" "Better," Theresa said honestly. She sat up slowly, pushing her tangled hair back from her face. "Thank you again for your kindness. I would be dead if not for you." "Then I am glad I found you," Harrison said simply. He brought her coffee and a plate of eggs and more cornbread. "The storm has not let up. We are stuck here for now." Theresa ate slowly, very aware of how she must look with her wrinkled dress and uncombed hair. Harrison did not seem to notice or care. He moved around the cabin with quiet efficiency, and she found herself studying him in the morning light. He was taller than she had realized, probably over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of a man who worked hard for his living. His hands were calloused and scarred, but he handled everything with surprising gentleness. "Tell me about yourself," Theresa said, partly to break the silence and partly because she was genuinely curious about the man who had saved her life. Harrison shrugged. "Not much to tell. I am 28 years old. I have worked on ranches since I was 14. My parents died when I was young, and I have been on my own most of my life. I came to Chisholm Ranch 3 years ago, and I have been here ever since." "You like it here?" Theresa asked. "It is as good a place as any," Harrison said. "The work is hard, but I am used to hard work. The pay is fair, and John Chisholm is a decent man to work for." He paused. "What about you? What was your life like before you came west?" Theresa wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "I grew up in Missouri. My father died when I was 16 and my mother passed 2 years ago. I had been working as a seamstress, but the work was scarce and the pay was poor. When Marcus came along and promised me a better life, I believed him." She laughed bitterly. "I sold everything I had to help fund the journey. I thought we were partners. I thought he cared for me." "Some men are good at lying," Harrison said quietly. "That is not your fault." They spent the rest of the day in the cabin while the storm raged outside. Harrison found her a spare shirt and a pair of trousers that were far too large for her, but at least they were clean and warm. He turned his back while she changed, then helped her roll up the sleeves and cinch the waist with a length of rope. Theresa felt strange in men's clothing, but she had to admit it was far more practical than her thin dress. As the hours passed, they talked. Harrison was not a man of many words, but when he did speak, his words were thoughtful and genuine. He told her about life on the ranch, about the cattle drives and the long days under the sun, about the other men he worked with and the vast New Mexico landscape. Theresa found herself relaxing in his presence, the fear and desperation of the previous night gradually fading. In turn, she told him about her life in Missouri, about her mother's kindness and her father's strength, about the small house where she grew up and the friends she had left behind. She told him about her love of reading and her skill with a needle and thread, about the dresses she had made and the customers who had praised her work. Talking about it made her realize how much she had given up, how completely Marcus had destroyed the life she had built. "I was a fool," she said softly as evening approached. "You were hopeful," Harrison corrected. "There is a difference." That night, Harrison insisted she take the bed again while he slept on the floor near the stove. Theresa tried to protest, but he was immovable on the subject. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the wind howl outside and the steady sound of Harrison's breathing. For the first time in months, she felt safe. The storm finally broke on the morning of December 26th. The world outside was transformed into a pristine white landscape that sparkled in the sunlight. Harrison ventured out first, breaking a path through the snow to check on his horse and gather more firewood. Theresa watched from the window, marveling at the beauty of it all despite the hardship it represented. When Harrison came back inside, his expression was serious. "The main road is impassable. It will be days before anyone can travel. We have enough supplies here, but I need to let the ranch know I am all right. They will be worried." "I am sorry I am keeping you from your work," Theresa said. "You are not keeping me from anything," Harrison said firmly. "I would not have gone anywhere in that storm anyway." He paused, then added, "Besides, I am glad you are here." Theresa felt her cheeks warm at his words. Over the next few days, they settled into a comfortable routine. Harrison taught her how to tend the stove properly and how to make cornbread from scratch. Theresa mended his shirts and socks, putting her seamstress skills to use. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, and Theresa found herself laughing more than she had in months. She also found herself watching Harrison more than she should. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way his hands moved with such careful precision, the way he always made sure she had the warmest spot by the stove and the largest portion of food. He was kind without being condescending, strong without being intimidating, and she felt drawn to him in a way that both thrilled and frightened her. On the third day after the storm, Harrison ventured out farther and returned with news. I made it to the main ranch. The foreman was relieved to see me. I told him about you, about what happened. Theresa tensed. What did he say? He said you are welcome to stay at the ranch if you need work, Harrison said. The ranch owner's wife could use help with the cooking and mending. It would not pay much, but it would be room and board. It was a generous offer, more than Theresa had any right to expect, but the thought of leaving this cabin, of leaving Harrison, made her chest tighten with an emotion she was not ready to name. That is very kind, she said carefully. But what will happen to me in the meantime? I cannot stay here indefinitely. This is your home. Harrison was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and serious. I have been thinking about that, about your situation. He met her eyes directly. You need security. You need a name that will protect you, a place where you belong, and I have both of those things to give. Theresa's heart began to pound. What are you saying? I am saying I could marry you, Harrison said bluntly. I know we have only known each other a few days. I know it is not romantic or proper, but it would solve your immediate problem. As my wife, you would have my name, my protection, and a home. No one could hurt you or turn you away. Theresa stared at him, unable to speak. The proposal was so unexpected, so practical, and yet so enormous in its implications that her mind could barely process it. You do not have to answer now, Harrison continued. Think about it. I am not asking you to love me or even to pretend to. I am offering you a solution, that is all. We could make it a partnership, an arrangement that benefits us both. I would treat you with respect, I would never hurt you, and you would be safe. Why would you do this? Theresa whispered. You barely know me. Harrison looked away, his jaw tightening. I know what it is like to have nothing. I know what it is like to be alone in the world with no one to turn to. If I can spare you that, then I will. He paused. And honestly, the idea of having someone to come home to, someone to share this life with, that does not sound bad to me. Even if it started as an arrangement, it could become something real over time, or it could stay as it is. Either way, you would be protected. Theresa's mind raced. It was an insane proposal by any standard. They had known each other less than a week, but what other options did she have? She had no money, no family, no prospects. Working at the ranch would give her survival, but it would not give her security or status. As a single woman with no reputation in this town, she would always be vulnerable. But as Harrison Cole's wife, she would have a position, a home, a name that meant something. And if she was being honest with herself, the thought of being bound to Harrison was not unpleasant. In the few days she had known him, he had shown her more kindness and respect than Marcus had in months. He was steady and reliable and good, and there was something about him that made her feel both safe and alive at the same time. If I said yes, she said slowly, what would you expect from me? I would expect you to keep the house, to cook and mend, the things you already do well, Harrison said. I would expect honesty and respect. As for the rest, he paused, his expression carefully neutral. We would figure that out as we go. I am not demanding anything you are not willing to give. Theresa took a deep breath. It was madness. It was impulsive and reckless and completely illogical. And yet, when she looked at Harrison, when she thought about the alternative, the answer seemed clear. Yes, she said. I will marry you. Harrison's eyes widened slightly, as though he had not actually expected her to agree. Then his expression softened into something that might have been relief. You are sure? I am sure, Theresa said, and she was surprised to find that she meant it. You have given me more in these few days than anyone else ever has. If you are willing to give me your name and your home, then I am willing to be your wife. Harrison nodded slowly. Then we will do this properly. As soon as the roads are clear, we will go to the minister and make it official. The roads cleared 2 days later, and true to his word, Harrison took her into town. The minister at the small church was surprised by the sudden marriage, but he agreed to perform the ceremony that very afternoon. Harrison bought Theresa a simple ring from the general store and a new dress that actually fit her properly, dark blue calico with tiny white flowers that made her feel almost pretty again. They stood before the minister in the empty church, with only the minister's wife as a witness. Theresa's hands trembled as Harrison slipped the ring onto her finger, but his own hands were steady and warm. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Harrison kissed her gently on the forehead, a chaste gesture that somehow felt more intimate than anything Marcus had ever done. And just like that, Theresa Dalton became Theresa Cole. They walked back to the cabin together through the snow, and Theresa felt as though she was in a dream. She was married, to a man she had known for less than 2 weeks. It should have terrified her, but instead, she felt a strange sense of peace settling over her shoulders like a warm cloak. That night, Harrison made a bed for himself on the floor again, despite Theresa's tentative suggestion that he did not have to. "We will take this slow," he said gently. "There is no rush." Theresa nodded, relieved and oddly disappointed at the same time. She lay in bed that night, now legally Harrison's wife, and wondered what she had gotten herself into. But when she looked over at Harrison's sleeping form by the stove, when she thought about his kindness and his quiet strength, she thought that maybe, just maybe, she had made the right choice. The weeks that followed were an adjustment for both of them. Harrison returned to work at the ranch, rising before dawn and often not returning until after dark. Theresa threw herself into making the cabin a proper home, cleaning and organizing and cooking meals that were waiting for him when he came back tired and covered in dust. It was hard work, but it was satisfying in a way her old life had never been. The other ranch hands were curious about Harrison's sudden marriage, but they were polite to Theresa and respectful of Harrison. The ranch owner's wife, a formidable woman named Catherine, invited Theresa to tea and offered her friendship along with practical advice about life in the territory. Slowly, Theresa began to feel like she belonged in Chisholm Ranch, like she had a place in this wild, beautiful landscape. But the real adjustment was learning to live with Harrison. He was a quiet man, often lost in his own thoughts, but he was never unkind. He remembered small things, like how she preferred her coffee or that she hated the smell of tobacco smoke. He brought her wildflowers when he found them on the range, awkward bouquets that made her smile. He listened when she talked and asked thoughtful questions, and he shared bits of his own life in return. They were still sleeping separately, Harrison on the floor and Theresa in the bed, but the space between them seemed to be shrinking. Sometimes Theresa would wake in the night and find Harrison watching her with an expression she could not quite read. Sometimes their hands would brush when they passed each other in the small cabin, and the contact would send a jolt of electricity through her entire body. It was late January when things finally shifted between them. Harrison came home from a long day on the range to find Theresa stirring a pot of stew over the stove. The cabin was warm and filled with the smell of cooking food, and she had cleaned everything until it gleamed. She turned to greet him with a smile, and Harrison stopped in the doorway just looking at her. "What is wrong?" Theresa asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing is wrong," Harrison said slowly. "I was just thinking that this feels like home now, because you are here." Theresa's breath caught. Harrison crossed the small space between them and gently cupped her face in his calloused hands. "Theresa, I know we started this as an arrangement, but I need you to know that it has become more than that for me. I care about you. I think about you all day when I am working. I look forward to coming home because I know you will be here. I know it has only been a month, but I am falling in love with you." Theresa felt tears prick her eyes. "Harrison, I feel the same way. I did not expect to, but I do. When you are gone, I miss you. When you are here, I am happy. You make me feel safe and valued and cherished in a way I have never felt before." Harrison's thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Can I kiss you? Really kiss you?" "Yes," Theresa breathed. Harrison lowered his head slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, but Theresa rose on her toes to meet him. When their lips touched, it was gentle at first, exploratory and sweet. Then Harrison's arms came around her, pulling her close, and Theresa melted into him. The kiss deepened, growing more passionate, and Theresa felt like she was burning from the inside out. This was nothing like Marcus's rough, demanding kisses. This was tender and passionate and full of genuine feeling. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "I want this to be a real marriage, Theresa, in every way, but only if you want that too." "I want it," Theresa said without hesitation. "I want you." That night, Harrison did not sleep on the floor. He held Theresa in his arms in the narrow bed, and they talked for hours, sharing secrets and dreams and fears. When they finally made love, it was tender and awkward and absolutely perfect, nothing like Theresa's fumbling experiences with Marcus. Harrison was patient and gentle, and he made her feel beautiful and desired and completely safe. Afterward, they lay tangled together, and Theresa thought that she had never been so happy in her entire life. The winter gave way to spring, and Theresa bloomed along with the desert flowers. She and Harrison grew closer every day, learning each other's rhythms and habits, building a life together that felt real and solid and good. Harrison taught her to ride a horse, and Theresa made him new shirts with careful stitches and embroidered designs. They made love often, sometimes with urgent passion and sometimes with slow, tender exploration. And every time Theresa fell more deeply in love with her unexpected husband. It was in late April when Theresa first suspected she might be pregnant. She missed her monthly courses and felt queasy in the mornings, and the signs were unmistakable. She was both thrilled and terrified, unsure how Harrison would react to the news. They had never discussed children, had never planned for this, and she worried that it was too soon, that he might not be ready. But when she finally gathered the courage to tell him one evening after supper, Harrison's face lit up with pure joy. "A baby! We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Theresa said, relief washing over her. "In the fall, I think. Are you happy about it?" "Happy." Harrison pulled her into his arms and spun her around, laughing. "Theresa, I am beyond happy. I am thrilled, terrified but thrilled." He set her down gently, suddenly anxious. "Are you all right? Is everything as it should be? You need to see a doctor." "I am fine," Theresa assured him, touched by his concern. "Catherine says there is a midwife in town who is very good. I will see her soon." Harrison kissed her soundly, then dropped to his knees and pressed a kiss to her still flat belly. "Hello, little one. I am your father, and I already love you so much." Theresa ran her fingers through his dark hair, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This man, this wonderful, unexpected man, had given her everything. He had saved her life, given her his name, his home, and his heart, and now they were creating a new life together. It was more than she had ever dreamed possible that terrible Christmas night when she thought she would die alone in the snow. The pregnancy was not easy. Theresa was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep food down, and Harrison hovered over her with anxious care. He brought her ginger tea and crackers, held her hair when she was ill, and rubbed her back when she could not sleep. As her belly grew, he helped her with the heavier chores and fussed over her constantly, much to her amusement. "I am pregnant, not dying," she told him one evening when he insisted on helping her put on her shoes. "I know," Harrison said, "but I cannot help worrying. You and this baby are the most important things in my life." Theresa softened. "I know, and I love you for it." The baby came in early October, after a long and difficult labor that left Theresa exhausted and Harrison pacing holes in the floor. The midwife was patient and competent, and Catherine stayed with them to help, but it was still the longest night of Harrison's life. When he finally heard the baby's first cry, he nearly collapsed with relief. "It is a boy," the midwife announced, placing the squalling infant in Theresa's arms. "A healthy, strong boy." Theresa looked down at her son with wonder. He had dark hair like Harrison and a red, angry face that was somehow the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. When Harrison came to sit beside her on the bed, looking at the baby with awe, Theresa saw tears in his eyes. "He is perfect," Harrison whispered. "You are both perfect." They named him Henry, after Harrison's father. Henry was a demanding baby, crying often and sleeping little, but neither Harrison nor Theresa minded. They took turns walking him through the night, soothing his cries and marveling at his tiny fingers and toes. Harrison was a devoted father, changing diapers and learning to soothe the baby with the same patience he showed his horses. As Henry grew, the cabin that had seemed adequate for 2 adults suddenly felt cramped. Harrison began planning an addition, working in his spare time to build on extra rooms. By the time Henry was walking, they had a proper bedroom, a larger kitchen, and space for more children if they were blessed with them. They were. Theresa became pregnant again when Henry was 2, and this time the pregnancy was easier. Their second child was born in the spring, another boy they named Thomas. Harrison joked that they were building their own ranch crew, but Theresa could see the pride and love in his eyes every time he looked at their sons. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Harrison continued to work at Chisholm Ranch, earning a reputation as one of the best hands in the territory. He was offered a foreman position, which came with better pay and a small house closer to the main ranch buildings. But Harrison turned it down, preferring his independence and the cabin he had built with his own hands. Theresa kept their home and raised their sons, but she also found time to return to her sewing. Word spread about her skill with a needle, and soon she had more work than she could handle, making dresses and shirts for the other ranch families. The extra income was welcome, but more than that, Theresa enjoyed having work that was hers, something beyond the domestic sphere. When Henry was 5 and Thomas was 3, Theresa became pregnant for a third time. This pregnancy was different from the start. She was more tired, more sick, and the midwife confirmed what Theresa had suspected. "Twins," the midwife said with a smile. "I can hear 2 heartbeats clear as day." Harrison was stunned by the news, then elated. "Twins! Theresa, we are going to have our hands full." "We already have our hands full," Theresa pointed out, but she was smiling. The twins arrived in late winter, a boy and a girl born within minutes of each other. The boy they named James, and the girl they named Lily, after Theresa's mother. With 4 children under the age of 6, the cabin was chaotic and loud and full of love. Harrison built another addition, creating bedrooms for the children and more space for their growing family. The years passed quickly. Henry grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working with his father and learning about the ranch. Thomas was wild and adventurous, always getting into trouble and making them laugh. James was quiet and gentle, content to spend hours looking at books and drawing pictures. And Lily was fierce and determined, a tiny force of nature who kept her 3 older brothers in line. Theresa and Harrison grew older together, their love deepening with every year. They had their disagreements, of course, their moments of frustration and exhaustion, but they always came back to each other. Harrison still brought Theresa wildflowers, even after 10 years of marriage. Theresa still made sure his favorite meals were waiting when he came home from work. They still made love with passion and tenderness, stealing moments alone when the children were asleep. It was on their 10th anniversary that Harrison took Theresa to the spot where he had found her that Christmas night. The snow was falling again, soft and gentle this time, and the town looked peaceful in the winter twilight. "You remember this night?" Harrison asked, holding her hand. "I remember thinking I was going to die," Theresa said softly. "I remember being so cold and so alone, and then you were there." "Best decision I ever made," Harrison said. "Finding you, bringing you home, giving you my name. I have never regretted it for a single moment." "Neither have I," Theresa said. She turned to face him, her breath misting in the cold air. "You saved my life that night, Harrison. But you did more than that. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me love when I thought I would never feel it again. You are the best man I have ever known, and I fall in love with you more every single day." Harrison pulled her close and kissed her, the snow falling around them like a blessing. "I love you, Theresa Cole. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, remembering that Christmas night when their lives had changed forever. Then they walked home together through the snow, toward the warm glow of their cabin where their children were waiting. The years continued to unfold with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Henry, who had always been the most serious of their children, showed a natural talent for working with cattle. By the time he was 12, he was spending every spare moment with Harrison, learning the intricacies of ranching with an intensity that made both parents proud. He had inherited Harrison's quiet strength and Theresa's careful attention to detail, a combination that served him well. Thomas, on the other hand, remained wild and restless. He loved the ranch but chafed at the discipline required. He was the one who brought home injured animals to nurse back to health, who climbed trees that were too tall and rode horses that were too spirited. He gave Theresa more gray hairs than the other 3 children combined, but his infectious laughter and warm heart made it impossible to stay angry with him for long. James developed a love for learning that surprised everyone. When a schoolteacher finally came to Chisholm Ranch to establish a small school for the ranching family's children, James was her most devoted student. He consumed books the way Thomas consumed adventure, and he talked endlessly about someday going to a real city and attending a university. Theresa encouraged him, even as Harrison worried about his gentle son surviving in the harsh world beyond the ranch. And Lily, their only daughter, grew into a force to be reckoned with. She could outride her brothers, outshoot most of the ranch hands, and had a will of iron that reminded everyone of her mother. But she also had a tender side that she showed only to her family, nursing her brothers when they were sick and helping Theresa with the household tasks without being asked. Harrison continued to thrive at Chisholm Ranch. Over the years, he had saved enough money to buy a small herd of his own cattle, which he ran alongside the ranch's stock. It was a step toward independence, toward someday owning his own land, and John Chisholm encouraged it. Harrison had proven himself to be loyal and hardworking, and the ranch owner had grown to trust and respect him. Theresa's sewing business had also grown. She now employed 2 other women from the town, teaching them her techniques and sharing the work. The income was significant enough that they were able to save money, dreaming of the day when they might buy their own ranch. It was a dream that seemed increasingly possible as the years passed, but life was not without its challenges. When Henry was 15, a particularly harsh winter killed several head of their personal cattle, a financial blow that set back their savings considerably. Harrison took it hard, blaming himself for not being better prepared, but Theresa reminded him that they still had each other and their children, and that was what truly mattered. Then there was the spring when Thomas, at age 13, broke his leg badly while trying to break a wild horse against his father's explicit orders. Harrison was furious, more out of fear than genuine anger, and he and Thomas had their first real argument. It was Theresa who mediated between them, helping both stubborn males see the other's perspective. Thomas healed, though he walked with a slight limp for the rest of his life, and the incident made him fractionally more cautious, though still far too adventurous for his mother's peace of mind. James's academic achievements brought their own complications. When he was 14, the schoolteacher told Harrison and Theresa that James had learned everything she could teach him. She recommended that they send him east to a proper school where he could develop his obvious talents. The discussion that followed was one of the most difficult the couple had ever had. Harrison did not want to send his son away. The idea of James in some distant city, far from his family and the protection they could provide, filled him with dread. But Theresa, despite her own reluctance, recognized that keeping James on the ranch would be like caging a bird meant to fly. "He needs this," she told Harrison one night as they lay in bed. "He needs the chance to become who he is meant to be, not just who we need him to be." "What if something happens to him?" Harrison asked. "What if he gets hurt or sick or lost and we are not there to help him?" "Then we will have taught him well enough that he can help himself," Theresa said gently. "Harrison, I know this is hard. It is hard for me too. But we cannot let our fear hold him back." In the end, they agreed to let James attend a boarding school in Santa Fe, close enough that he could come home for holidays but far enough to give him the education he craved. The day they put him on the stagecoach, both Harrison and Theresa cried, though Harrison tried to hide it. James himself was excited and terrified in equal measure, clutching the bag Theresa had packed for him and promising to write every week. He kept that promise. His letters home were full of wonder and discovery, descriptions of books and ideas and people from all over the territory and beyond. He was thriving, and while Harrison and Theresa missed him terribly, they were proud of the young man he was becoming. Lily, meanwhile, announced at age 12 that she had no intention of ever getting married or leaving the ranch. "I am going to stay here and help run things," she declared firmly. "I am as good a rider as any of the hands, and I can shoot better than most of them. Why would I need a husband when I can do everything myself?" Theresa hid her smile and exchanged a glance with Harrison. "You have plenty of time to decide what you want to do with your life," she told her daughter. "But yes, you are certainly capable of doing anything you set your mind to." As the children grew older and more independent, Harrison and Theresa found themselves with more time alone together. It was strange at first, after so many years of being constantly surrounded by the noise and demands of their children. But they rediscovered each other in those quiet moments, remembering what it had been like in the early days of their marriage when it had been just the two of them in the cabin. They took long rides together through the New Mexico landscape, Harrison showing Theresa parts of the ranch she had never seen. They talked for hours the way they had when they were newlyweds, sharing thoughts and dreams and memories. And they made love with a passion that had not dimmed despite the years, and the children and the hardships they had faced. "I am glad it was you," Theresa told Harrison one evening as they watched the sunset from the porch of their expanded cabin. "That night in the snow, I am so glad it was you who found me." "I am glad too," Harrison said, pulling her close. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Theresa. You and our children, this life we have built together. I would not change a single moment, not even the hard parts." Theresa asked with a slight smile. Especially not the hard parts, Harrison said. They made us stronger. They taught us what we are capable of together. When Henry turned 18, he asked his father for permission to court a girl from one of the neighboring ranches. Her name was Sarah, and she was the daughter of one of the other ranchers. Harrison knew her family and approved, though it was strange to think of his oldest son as a man ready to start his own family. Theresa was more emotional about it, crying as she helped Henry get ready for his first formal visit to Sarah's home. "I am not losing you," she told Henry as she adjusted his collar. "Please tell me I am not losing you." "You are not losing me, Ma," Henry said gently. "I will always be your son." "But Sarah, she makes me happy. I think I could love her the way Pa loves you." Theresa's tears fell harder at that, but they were happy tears. Then she must be a very special girl. Henry and Sarah's courtship was proper and traditional, with Henry visiting her family regularly, and Sarah occasionally visiting their ranch with her parents. Harrison watched his son with satisfaction, seeing the same kind of steady, genuine affection developing between Henry and Sarah that he had found with Theresa. When Henry asked for his blessing to propose, Harrison gave it gladly. They were married the following spring, a joyous occasion that brought together families from ranches all across the territory. Sarah was a sweet girl with a practical nature and a good heart, and she fit into their family seamlessly. Harrison had already built a small house on their property for the young couple, wanting to keep his son close, and Henry continued to work the ranch alongside his father. Less than a year later, Theresa became a grandmother for the first time. Henry and Sarah's baby girl was named Theresa, after her grandmother, and Theresa Cole held her tiny namesake and marveled at the passage of time. It seemed impossible that she had been that young woman freezing in the snow 20 years ago, impossible that she now had a grown son and a grandchild. Thomas, at age 17, had still not settled down. He talked constantly about adventure, about seeing the country beyond New Mexico, about maybe joining a cattle drive to Kansas, or even going further west to California. Harrison tried to be understanding, remembering his own restless youth, but he worried about his wild second son. "He will find his way," Theresa assured Harrison. "He just needs to explore first to see what is out there. Then he will appreciate what he has here." "I hope you are right," Harrison said. But when Thomas announced at 18 that he was indeed leaving to join a cattle drive north, Harrison struggled to hide his disappointment. They had a tense conversation in which Harrison tried to convince Thomas to stay to work the ranch, to build a life here where he belonged. But Thomas was determined, and in the end, Harrison had to let him go. The goodbye was difficult for everyone. Thomas promised to write and to come home when he could, but they all knew it might be months or even years before they saw him again. Theresa cried for days after he left, and even Harrison, who prided himself on his stoic strength, was quieter and more withdrawn than usual. But true to his word, Thomas did write. His letters came from Kansas, from Colorado, from places they had only heard of. He described vast herds of cattle and endless plains, rough towns and rougher men, adventures and close calls that made Theresa's heart stop. But he also wrote that he missed them, missed home, and that someday he would come back. James finished his schooling in Santa Fe and surprised everyone by announcing that he wanted to become a lawyer. He had been accepted to study law in San Francisco, a journey that would take him farther from home than anyone in the family had ever gone. Harrison was proud but heartbroken, and even Lily cried when James left, though she tried to hide it. With 2 sons gone and Henry married and living in his own home, the cabin felt empty in a way it never had before. Only Lily remained, now 15 and more determined than ever to stay and help run the ranch. She worked alongside the hands during the day and helped her mother in the evenings, and both Harrison and Theresa were grateful for her presence. It was during this quieter period that Harrison finally decided to pursue his dream of owning his own ranch. He and Theresa had saved diligently over the years, and their personal herd had grown despite the occasional setback. When a piece of property adjacent to Chisholm Ranch came up for sale, Harrison went to look at it with Henry and came back with stars in his eyes. "It is perfect," he told Theresa. "Good grazing land, a creek running through it, enough space to build a proper house. We could do this, Theresa. We could finally have our own place." Theresa looked at the numbers, calculated their savings, and nodded slowly. "It will take everything we have. We will have to work harder than ever. But yes, I think we can do this." The negotiation and purchase took months, but eventually the land was theirs. Harrison Cole, who had started with nothing but a small cabin and a job as a ranch hand, was now a landowner. The reality of it was almost overwhelming. They celebrated with a family dinner, with Henry and Sarah and baby Theresa, with Lily, and with John Chisholm and some of the other ranchers who had become friends over the years. Harrison gave a rare speech, thanking everyone who had helped them along the way, but especially Theresa. "None of this would have been possible without my wife," he said, his voice thick with emotion. 21 years ago, I found her freezing in the snow on Christmas Eve. I gave her my cabin and my name, thinking I was helping her. But the truth is, she saved me just as much as I saved her. She gave me a reason to build something, to work for something beyond just survival. She gave me a family, a home, and a love that has sustained me through every challenge. This ranch, this dream, it is as much hers as it is mine." Theresa stood and went to her husband, kissing him in front of everyone to applause and good-natured cheering. "We built this together," she said, "and we will keep building it together." The next few years were consumed with developing the new ranch. Harrison and Henry worked from dawn to dusk, building fences and barns, improving the grazing land, and increasing the herd. Theresa designed and oversaw the construction of a new house, larger and more comfortable than the cabin, but still with the same warm, welcoming feel. Lily worked as hard as any of the men, earning the respect of the hands they hired and proving that she was every bit as capable as she had always claimed. Sarah had 2 more children, both boys, giving Theresa 3 grandchildren to spoil. The ranch prospered, and the Cole name became known throughout the territory as belonging to honest, hard-working people who could be trusted. Everything Harrison and Theresa had dreamed of was coming true. Then, one spring day, a familiar figure rode up to the ranch house. Theresa was in the garden when she heard the horse, and she looked up to see a tall, lean man dismounting. For a moment, she did not recognize him. Then he grinned, that familiar, reckless grin, and she screamed. Thomas, her wild second son, had come home. He was 22 now, tanned and hardened by years on the trail, but still unmistakably Thomas. Theresa ran to him and threw her arms around him, crying and laughing at the same time. Harrison came running from the barn, and even his eyes were wet as he embraced his son. "I told you I would come home," Thomas said, his voice deeper than they remembered. "I have seen the country, had my adventures, but this is where I belong." Thomas brought stories of his travels, tales that kept the whole family entertained for weeks. But he also brought something else, a determination to stay and help build the family ranch. He had learned a lot on the trail, skills that would be valuable as they expanded their operation. Harrison welcomed him back gladly, grateful to have another son working beside him. Thomas also brought news of James, whom he had visited in San Francisco. Their scholarly brother was doing well, had finished his law studies, and was working for a firm that defended miners and small ranchers against larger corporate interests. He was making a difference, Thomas reported, and was happy in his own way, though he missed the family. He said he might come home for a visit next year, Thomas said. He wanted me to tell you he is proud of what you have built here. Lily, now 19, had finally agreed to attend a few social gatherings with other young people from the territory. To everyone's surprise, including her own, she had met a young man who intrigued her. His name was Daniel, and he was the son of a rancher from further south. He was impressed rather than intimidated by Lily's competence and strength, and he treated her as an equal rather than as a delicate flower to be protected. "I might have been wrong about never getting married," Lily admitted to her mother one evening. "Daniel is different. He does not want to change me or tame me. He just wants to be with me." "That is how it should be," Theresa said, thinking of Harrison. "When it is right, it does not feel like losing yourself. It feels like becoming more yourself." Lily and Daniel courted for a year before he proposed. When he came to ask Harrison for permission to marry his daughter, Harrison respected the young man's courage in facing a protective father. The wedding was held at the ranch, a joyous celebration that brought James home from California for the first time in years. The whole family was together, all 4 children and their spouses or partners, and Theresa looked around at the gathering and marveled at how blessed they were. James stayed for several weeks, enjoying the peace of the ranch after the bustle of San Francisco. He told them about his work, about the cases he was handling and the injustices he was fighting. He had found his calling, and though it was far from the ranch, both Harrison and Theresa were proud of him. "You do not have to stay here to make us proud," Harrison told him on his last night before returning to California. "You are doing good work out there. Important work. We just want you to be happy and to know you always have a home here if you need it." "I know, Pa," James said. "And that knowledge is what gives me the courage to keep fighting the hard fights." As the years continued to pass, the ranch grew and prospered. Henry took on more and more responsibility, allowing Harrison to slow down slightly as he approached his 50s. Thomas proved to be invaluable with his knowledge of markets and trails, establishing trading relationships that improved their profits. Lily and Daniel built a house on the ranch property and started their own family, adding more grandchildren to the growing Cole clan. Theresa, now in her mid-40s, had finally allowed herself to slow down as well. She still managed the household and oversaw her sewing business, but she also took time to enjoy the fruits of their labor. She spent hours with her grandchildren, teaching them to sew and telling them stories. She took long rides with Harrison, who still looked at her the way he had when they were newlyweds. She tended her garden and read books and lived a life of contentment she had never imagined possible. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Harrison surprised her by taking her back to Chisholm Ranch Town, to the spot where he had found her that Christmas night. It was summer now, hot and dry, nothing like that snowy evening so long ago, but the memories were as vivid as ever. "I have been thinking about that night a lot lately," Harrison said, holding her hand. "About how close I came to not going into town that day, about how easily I could have missed you, and I am just so grateful that I did not. Every good thing in my life came from that moment when I found you." "I think about it too," Theresa said softly. "I think about how terrified I was, how certain I was that my life was over. I could not have imagined that 25 years later, I would be standing here with you, with a family and a home and more happiness than I knew existed." She turned to face him fully. "You did not just give me your cabin and your name that night, Harrison. You gave me a future. You gave me hope. You gave me love." Harrison pulled her close and kissed her, the same tender kiss he had given her in the church all those years ago. And you gave me a reason to live instead of just survive. You made my house a home. You gave me children and grandchildren and a legacy. You are my everything, Theresa Cole. They stood there as the sun set over the New Mexico landscape. Two people who had found each other in the darkest moment and had built a lifetime of light together. The cabin where they had started was still standing on the ranch property, preserved as a reminder of where they had begun. But the life they had built had grown far beyond those small walls. As they rode back to the ranch together, Theresa thought about the girl she had been that Christmas Eve, abandoned and alone and certain she was going to die. She thought about the cowboy who had saved her, who had offered her everything he had without expecting anything in return. And she thought about all the years that had followed, the challenges and triumphs, the children and grandchildren, the love that had only deepened with time. "Thank you," she said to Harrison as they approached the ranch house, lights glowing in the windows where their family waited. "For what?" Harrison asked. "For finding me," Theresa said simply. "For choosing me, for loving me, for all of it." Harrison smiled and squeezed her hand. "I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every single moment." The ranch continued to thrive as the years turned into decades. Harrison and Theresa watched their children's children grow up, teaching them the values of hard work and honesty that had guided their own lives. They celebrated weddings and births, weathered losses and setbacks, and always faced everything together. When Harrison was 60 and Theresa was 54, they decided to officially hand over the day-to-day running of the ranch to Henry and Thomas. It was time, Harrison admitted, to let the younger generation take the lead. He and Theresa would still be involved, still offer guidance when asked, but they were ready to step back and enjoy their remaining years in peace. They spent their days much as they had in the beginning, just the two of them in the old cabin that they had reclaimed as their private retreat. Harrison still brought her wildflowers. Theresa still made his favorite meals. They still talked for hours and made love with passion and tenderness. The years had silvered their hair and lined their faces, but the love between them was as strong as it had ever been. One winter evening, as they sat by the fire in the cabin, Theresa looked at Harrison and smiled. "Do you remember what you said to me the night we met? You said, 'I have got you. Stay with me now.'" "I remember," Harrison said, reaching for her hand. "I did stay with you," Theresa said, "and it was the best decision I ever made." "We stayed with each other," Harrison corrected gently. "That is what made it work." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance in the stove, and thought about the journey they had taken together. From that desperate Christmas night to this peaceful winter evening, they had built a life of meaning and purpose and love. They had created a family that would carry on long after they were gone. They had turned a simple act of kindness into a legacy that would last for generations. Harrison and Theresa lived many more years together, watching their grandchildren have children of their own, seeing the ranch continue to grow and prosper under Henry and Thomas's capable management. James eventually returned from California with his wife and children, ready to raise his family in the place he had always loved. Lily and Daniel's children became expert ranchers in their own right, carrying on the family tradition. When Harrison finally passed at the age of 78, surrounded by his wife and children and grandchildren, his last words were for Theresa. "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for choosing this life with me. I love you." Theresa held his hand as he drew his last breath, her own tears falling freely. She had known this day would come eventually, had tried to prepare herself for it, but the pain of losing him was still overwhelming. He had been her partner, her love, her best friend for over 50 years. But even in her grief, Theresa found comfort in the life they had built together. She was surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who all existed because of that snowy Christmas night when a cowboy had found a freezing woman and offered her everything he had. She had loved deeply and been loved deeply in return. She had lived a full, rich life filled with meaning and purpose. Theresa lived for several more years after Harrison's death, staying in the cabin they had shared and spending her days with her family. She told stories of their early years together, of the challenges they had overcome and the love that had sustained them. She made sure that every child and grandchild knew the story of how she and Harrison had met, how he had saved her life and given her his name, and how that single act of kindness had changed everything. When Theresa finally joined Harrison at the age of 81, she was buried beside him on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The headstones were simple but bore inscriptions that told their story. Harrison Cole, who gave everything he had to a stranger in need. Theresa Cole, who turned a gift into a lifetime of love. The ranch continued to thrive under the care of their descendants, the Cole name becoming synonymous with integrity and hard work throughout the territory. The cabin where it all began was preserved as a family shrine, a reminder of humble beginnings and the power of compassion. And every Christmas, the family gathered there to remember the night when a cowboy found a woman freezing in the snow and chose to save her, setting in motion a legacy of love that would endure for generations. The story of Harrison and Theresa became the foundation of the Cole family, told and retold to each new generation. It was a story of kindness and courage, of taking a chance on love even when circumstances seemed impossible, of building something beautiful from the ashes of despair. It was a reminder that a single act of generosity could change not just one life, but countless lives that followed. And in the end, that was perhaps the greatest legacy of all. Not the ranch or the land or the material success, but the proof that love, genuine and selfless and true, could transform everything. That a man who had nothing but a cabin and his name could give those gifts to a stranger and receive in return a lifetime of happiness. That a woman who had been abandoned with nothing could find not just survival but joy, purpose, and a love that would echo through the ages. The Cole family continued to grow and flourish, generation after generation, all of them carrying within them the story of how it all began. They carried Harrison's quiet strength and Theresa's resilient spirit. They carried the lesson that kindness matters, that love endures, that hope can be found even in the darkest moments. And they carried the knowledge that their family existed because one cold Christmas night, a cowboy chose compassion over indifference, and a woman chose trust over fear. It was a love story for the ages, played out against the backdrop of the Wild West, a testament to the power of human connection and the transformative nature of genuine love. And it all began with a simple, profound act. A man giving a woman his cabin and his name, not knowing that she would give him a reason to live, a family to cherish, and a love that would last forever.